I once read a story about a woman who explained that her favorite spot in the local zoo was the House of Night exhibit. You know, a place where all those wonderful nocturnal creatures can crawl and fly about without worrying about being daytime or nighttime. You know, even on the brightest of days, they were able to fly because it was so dark in that house, in that exhibit. Well, she writes that one day, one very bright, sunny day, she stepped into the exhibit and was plunged into immediate darkness. Total darkness. Not even able to see the hand in front of your face sort of darkness. And almost immediately, a small hand grabbed hers. And she looked down at where her hand would have been if she could have seen it, and said, "And who do you belong to?" And a little boy's voice spoke into the darkness, "I'm yours until the lights come on." This morning I want to ask you a question. Who do you belong to? Who do you belong to? I figure I ought to start by, introducing myself to you. It's been almost 3 years, I know. Some may still not know who I really am. Some may be visiting here for the very first time or only recently started attending. So I think it might help if I share with you a little bit about myself and start by introducing myself. Several years ago, back in October of 1900, none of your business, my parents introduced me by sending out a card that looked something like this. It says on the front, "Hello, I'm adopted." And I like that. It's very special, very meaningful and everything. This was a while back, so no, that's not a picture of what I look like. Okay? But the outside of the card was exciting and is meaningful, but the inside, I believe, is even more so. It says at the top, "I wasn't expected, I was selected." And you know, that's true of everyone who is adopted nowadays, especially today with the open adoptions where the birth parents and the prospective adoptive parents meet and they basically get to choose each other and so on and so forth. But it's true in a very special way for me, because my parents had already adopted a boy and they were wanting to adopt a little girl. And they were going to go through the same organization, Christian Homes and Family Services in Abilene, Texas, to get this little girl. And they called and said, "We have a little girl, and would you like to come up and look?" And they said, "Well, sure." They went up to look at this little girl, and my mom saw my red hair. And even though I was not a girl, she immediately fell in love. And the rest, as they say, is history. Because they didn't adopt a little girl, they adopted me. So I really wasn't expected. I was selected. But you know, I have had the incredible experience of being adopted, not once but twice in my lifetime. And this morning I'd like to share with you a little bit about each of those experiences. And we start with the first time that I was adopted. I don't remember a whole lot about it because, I was only about 6 weeks old at the time. But when I was adopted the first time, I received some very special blessings. The first of those was I received a new family. Now, in contrast to many adoptees today, I know absolutely nothing about my birth mother, or birth father for that matter. I know nothing about them. Both my brother and sister, who were also adopted, have made contact with their birth mother at least, maybe father too, I'm not sure. But, and they're happy with that, and that's wonderful. It was kind of strange though, that a month or two ago when we went to my niece's wedding in Oklahoma City, this lady just, "Oh, you must be Carl." Okay. And just on and on and on, and all this stuff, and I finally got away from her and asked my parents, I said, who is she? So that's your brother's birth mother. Oh, okay. So anyway, but you know, I personally, though, I've never really had the desire to contact with them. I mean, unless, of course, they or I were sick and needed a kidney, or perhaps if they are multi-gazillionaires and they need an heir. I'm cool with that. No. I would like to thank her and possibly him. And quite honestly, I am thankful to God for her and possibly his decision that led to my adoption. Because I did move from being in one family to a new family. I was adopted by Jim and Barbara Dye. They are my father and mother. I had a friend who grew up with. He was adopted, same age as I was and everything. Whenever he would get mad at his parents, he would always say, I want to go live with my real parents. I want to go live with my real parents. I said, you are living with your real parents. No, I'm not. These are my adopted parents. I want to go find my real mom and everything. I thought about that, and in all honesty, Jim and Barbara Dye are my real parents. They're the only ones that I've ever known as parents. And they may not have contributed to my conception, but they are my real parents, and I am their real son. That's the wonder of adoption, is that a child is taken from one family and placed into a new family, a real family, a forever family. But more than just a new family, another blessing that I received when I was adopted the first time was a new hope. And I say a new hope because, although I don't like to think about it, sometimes I do, about what could have happened. What could have happened to me? Well, I could have been aborted. Yes, I know Roe v. Wade wasn't until 1973 when that quote-unquote decision by the Supreme Court was announced and given and everything. And yes, I do predate 1973. But don't be fooled, abortion was around before 1973. And that could have been how my life ended, is through abortion. I could have been kept by my birth parents, possibly raised by a single mother who perhaps was disowned by her parents and the rest of her family because of, well, me, the shame of the family. Shunned by the quote-unquote father because he didn't want to have anything to do with the girl anymore that he had committed parenthood with. No positive male role model in my formative years. Possibly raised in poverty, turned to a life of crime, and be either in jail or dead now. Now, granted, this is worst case scenario, okay? But still, it's all a possibility. But instead of that worst case scenario, instead of anything else that happened, the best possible scenario happened. I was adopted. That's what happened. And with that adoption came hope. But that hope didn't come cheap. That hope came at an enormous price. As I mentioned, I was only 6 weeks old at the time. Didn't have a lot of money. Didn't have a lot of possessions, no stocks, bonds, or anything like that. So that enormous price had to be paid by somebody, because I couldn't do it. You want to know who paid that price? Jim and Barbara Dye paid that price. They paid the legal fees, they paid the adoption fees, all the other fees that were associated with it. Plus, they incurred the regular expense of raising a somewhat accident-prone child who was on a first-name basis with the doctors in the emergency room when he was growing up. And they did this, with the exception of the ER thing, they did this not once, not twice, but 3 times. Because like I said, they wanted a girl, so they went back a third time and they got my sister. So who do you belong to? Because I was adopted by them, I belong to Jim and Barbara Dye. They are my parents and they will always be my parents. I proudly wear their name. They paid the price so that I could call them my parents. And they paid the price so that I could be their son. But I told you I was adopted twice. That was the first time. The second time that I was adopted, I also got some pretty special blessings. The second time that I was adopted, I also received a new family. New family because I'm now a child of God. If you turn in your Bibles to John chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, John writes these words, "Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent." What does that mean, not of natural descent? It means that you cannot be, quote unquote, born a Christian. Okay? It's not hereditary. Now, I know parents can pass their faith on to their children and everything, but there comes a point in time when that child has to make a choice. Faith is not hereditary. They have to make their choice. Children born not of natural descent, nor of a husband's, nor of a human decision. You can't decide that you are, quote unquote, good enough to be a member of his family. You can't decide that you can join this family on your own merit or on your own terms, on your own conditions. Nor of a husband's will. Nobody can make the decision for you to join this family. You have to make it for yourself. So, yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, nor a husband's will, but born of God. Look at Ephesians chapter 1, verses 4 through 6. Paul has some more to say about our adoption into the family of God and how it is the result of three things. Let's read Ephesians 1, 4 through 6 and see if you can pick out the three things. For he chose us, God, he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us to be adopted as his sons through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has freely given us in the one he loves. Did you pick them out? Our adoption into the family of God is the result, first of all, of a father's choice, verse 4. God didn't have to redeem us. He didn't have to adopt us. He could have said, you know what, I gave you everything, Adam and Eve, and you blew it. So forget it. But he didn't. He made a choice. It's also the result of a father's love, verse 5. In love, he predestined us to be adopted as his sons through Jesus Christ. And it's the result of a father's sacrifice, verse 6, that grace freely given. That's the theme of the entire New Testament, really. Our adoption gives us a new family. Because now we're a member of the family of God. But more than just a new family, the second time that I was adopted, I also received a new hope. A new hope. Turn back a couple of pages in your Bible to Galatians 3, verses 26 through chapter 4, verse 7. Paul writes these words, "You are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For all of you who are baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." What I'm saying is that as long as the heir is a child, he is no different from a slave, although he owns the whole estate. He is subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by his Father. So also when we were children, we were in slavery under the basic principles of the world. But when the time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under law, that we might receive the full rights of sons. Because you are sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you're no longer a slave, but a son. And since you are a son, God has made you also an heir. There are three parts to this new hope that we receive when we are adopted into the family of God. The first is that I now have the full rights of a son. Full rights of a son. I'm not a slave anymore, not a servant. I'm a child of God's. These full rights of a son, there are at least 5 that are mentioned in this passage. One is that I have the right to enjoy a new father. A father who loves me so much that he redeemed me, that he bought me back, that he bailed me out of a horrible situation that I was in. We'll talk about that in a second too. I have the right to enjoy a new father. I have the right to enjoy a new intimacy. I'm able now to call out call out Abba, Father, that Aramaic term of affection that a little child would use for his father. A term of affection that a slave was forbidden from addressing the master of the estate by. I have the right to enjoy a new access. Don't have special times when I can talk to him. I can talk to him anytime, anywhere, any place, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It doesn't matter. I have the right to a new position. Again, no longer am I a slave, but a son. And the right to a new inheritance. I'm now an heir, not just of some great big rich person somewhere. I am an heir of God. I have the full rights of a son. That's part of the new hope. But in addition to those full rights as a son, as part of this new hope, I also have a future to inspire me. Look again at chapter 4, verse 7. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And since you are a son, God has made you also an heir. What does God own? If we're an heir of God, what is it that we stand to inherit? What does it mean to be his heir? Well, if you look at Romans 8, verse 32, we find out what it means. It says, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? What this means is that God will provide for us. Now, it may not be everything that we want, but it will be everything that we need. It may not be what we would consider to be ideal, but it will be what he knows is best for us. I went from a hopeless to a hope-filled future. I have the full rights of a son. I have a future to inspire me. And finally, I have a finalization to assure me. Do you realize that an adoption that is not finalized is not an adoption? You know, it's kind of weird, but you know, relationships may develop prior to that finalization. When relationships between birth parents and adoptive parents, between the adoptive parents and perhaps a child, that once a child is born and all, but until a judge says so, it ain't so. That's just the way that it works. And once that judge says so, then there is a celebration ceremony in that courtroom to celebrate the adoption. Our finalization ceremony occurred at our baptism. That's when we put on Christ. That's when we joined this new family. That's when the judge said so. You know, the cost to adopt a child can be fairly steep. We have some friends who are going through the process, or have gone through the payment process, if you will, and are now currently awaiting a baby. But in the meantime, over the past 6 to 9 months, they've been doing fundraisers and selling this and that and the other, and trying to raise the money so that they could pay that financial cost. But there's also a time cost, not just a financial cost. There's a time cost. There's papers to be filled out. Mountains and mountains of paperwork to be filled out. Court hearings to attend. Other orientations and so forth. There's a commitment cost as well. I mean, you're going to take responsibility for that child as your own. So there's this great cost involved, financial, time, commitment. But if you were to ask any parent who has gone through that process to adopt a child, so was it worth it? I doubt very seriously that any of them would ever hesitate before saying absolutely it's worth it. Absolutely it's worth it, because there is no sacrifice too great for me to make for my child. There's another group of people that make a sacrifice. Birth mothers and fathers. I heard it described once, wife described once as a Rubik's Cube. That start out with it all nice and neat. Everything's just where it's supposed to be, and it looks wonderful, and it's great and all. But then, this quote-unquote unplanned accident messes up their lives. Messes it up to where they don't know how they're going to get it fixed. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to turn. Perhaps it does worse than just mess up their life. Perhaps it shatters their life. They end up completely broken. But really, that's the result of all of sin. It at best messes up our life. At worst, it completely destroys and moves our lives, makes our lives completely broken. Do you know the only way that I could ever solve a Rubik's Cube was to take it apart and put it back together again right? That's just the way I am, okay? I couldn't do it. That's just what adoption agencies, especially those that are Christian adoption agencies, do for these people. Is they help them put their lives back together again. And those Christian adoption agencies also include God back into the life of that birth mother and father. I have two beautiful daughters who absolutely love for me to talk about them in sermons. They do. That's why I'm not looking at them right now. I can't even begin to imagine my life if I had given them away when they were born. I can't do it. I can't imagine that. Yet, somewhere in this world, there's a woman who loves me, who never met her and who she possibly never met. But she loves me so much that she was willing to do something I can't even fathom. And that's what birth parents everywhere do, is they love their child so much that they put the child's needs ahead of their own needs. You know, a lot of times, people would kid me when I was growing up. Well, your parents don't love you, and so they gave you away. No. That ain't it at all. They loved me so much that they wanted to give me a future. They wanted to give me a hope. They put my needs ahead of their own needs and made that sacrifice that I can't even imagine for the child. I'm telling you, does that sound like anyone else that you've ever heard of? That sounds a little bit like, I don't know, a father somewhere who did not spare his own son, but sent him to earth to live and die for us. Let me tell you one more story. On one occasion, there was an orphaned boy who was living with his grandmother when their house caught fire. Grandmother's bedroom was on the ground floor. The boy's bedroom was on the second floor. And the grandmother was trying to get to the boy, but was unable to, and she perished in the fire. The boy's cries for help were finally answered by a man. No one had ever seen this man before, but he heard the cries for help, and he scaled an iron drain pipe to the second floor window of the boy's room. Got the boy, and then descended that same drain pipe with the boy hanging tightly to his neck for dear life. Several weeks later, there was a hearing held in a courtroom to determine who should receive custody of the little boy. Well, several people had offered and all, but it came down to three people. There was a farmer, a teacher, and the town's wealthiest citizen. They come down to those three, and so they were, as they were talking and debating over which one was a more better fit for the boy and everything, and all, the boy was just sitting there with his eyes locked on the floor. But then a stranger walked into the courtroom. And he didn't just stop in the back in the audience part. He walked all the way to the front of the courtroom. And he pulled his hands out of his pockets to reveal severe scars. As the crowd that was there gasped in horror, the boy cried out in joyful recognition. This was the man who had saved his life. His hands had been burned when he climbed that hot pipe. With a leap, the boy threw his arms around the stranger's neck and held on once again for dear life. And as he did so, the other three men silently walked away, leaving the boy and his rescuer alone. Those marred hands had settled the issue. And so it is with Jesus. His nail-pierced hands remind us that He rescued us from sin and its deadly consequences. For the next several weeks, building up to our Friends' Day on August 28th, remember that date. Plan on being here. Plan on inviting your friends, family, neighbors, co-workers, your enemies. Invite them all to come and join us on August 28th. But on building up to that day, we're going to deal with the difficult question, what will you do with Jesus? Jesus loved you and loves you so much that He left heaven and He came to earth. And He bled and He died. His body was mangled and scarred. And He did it all for you. So that you could be adopted into the family of God. So I ask you again, who do you belong to? If you don't belong to God, then what will you do with Jesus? Will you listen to Him? Will you trust in Him? Will you turn to Him? Will you surrender to Him? Will you die with Him? Will you live for Him? Who do you belong to? If you don't belong to Jesus, what are you going to do with Jesus? Are you going to allow Him to be your Lord, or are you going to allow Him to just be another voice in your life telling you to do stuff that you really don't want to do anyway and just blow Him off? I would encourage you, as we'll talk about next week, I would encourage you to listen. Listen to Him, because right now He might be tugging at the door of your heart, asking, begging to be led in. He can help you do that in some way through a public response. I want to give you that opportunity right now by coming to the front as we stand and sing together.